Hello, and welcome back to the Yoga Well podcast. I'm your host, Chase Bossart. This episode, I had the opportunity to talk with Robyn Love, who is a longtime teacher of Vinyasa and practitioner of meditation. She's also been a longtime student of mine, and she's a practicing artist. Our conversation is around the intersection between yoga and the creative process. I hope you'll enjoy it. Thank you. In getting started today, Robyn, I would really like to hear your story and how you got interested in cultivation of our human system and the minding the mind and these things. And you have been such a serious practitioner, and you have gone so deeply on both a physical level and mental, emotional level. I'm just really curious about what was the event that sent you in this direction? And what was the process? How did it work?
Hmm. Yeah, such a fun question. I think, um, you know, I was thinking about this a little bit ahead of time and in anticipation, and I guess I want to actually start super far back and say that, like many people, when I was an early teenager, I was filled with a longing. Didn't know how to articulate it, but I had this deep longing for something. And I looked towards the church I grew up in, and it just didn't meet me where I was. And so I kind of put that down and continued on. And since I was 6 years old, I identified myself as an artist. So I had art to look towards. But fast forward through art school, I ended up in India doing independent study, and I made a connection there with Buddhism, which I had never heard of. I didn't know anything about, but I had an experience at the Ajanta caves in it's kind of central west India.
Yeah, the stunning.
I
So beautiful.
Yeah, there are these caves in a cliff that have been carved out, centuries ago, and in particular, was in the Buddhist caves and just had an experience there that I don't have really words for, but kind of sent me out back to my hostel going like, okay, what is Buddhism? And like, what is
I
Buddhism?
totally
And
get
I met,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and I had met these two British guys, and I like remember asking them like, what is Buddhism? And they handed me a pamphlet that they had picked up on their travels about the Four Noble Truths. And I have such a distinct memory of this pamphlet. I can totally picture it. And I remember reading it, and I had a similar experience of my like 13-year-old self, like reading the Bible over and over, going like, this isn't like, what? It's not it. It's not it. And then reading this very dry academic pamphlet on the Four Noble Truths, I was like, no, this is not it. It's not like what happened in that cave met me. It touched, it pierced me. And this dry pamphlet is not, no. so,
For
so
for
then,
those who don't
yeah.
for those who don't know, this cave is it's a series of caves set in a cliff that have been carved out, and they carved into them many reliefs and statues, and they were living quarters and temples and meditation halls. And when you're in that space, there's a feeling there. It's not an ordinary space,
Yeah.
and it's that which is what pierced you. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, there's a series of caves, and they move from Buddhist to Hindu to Jain, and in particular, even though they're not the most popular ones, I really spent most of my time in those Buddhist caves. Like I spent a week going there every day, so
and
it was a
and
good
that is the
time.
thing that resonated with you, that the physical, that the philosophical just didn't quite
Yeah,
meet.
yeah, exactly. It was, and in my, I was like 19, just to say, so I didn't have any words for any of it. And um, yeah, I couldn't have said, oh, it's this and that. None of that made any sense to me, but I was there basically doing my art, having a million experiences, but in particular, that one was very powerful and never forgot it. And I guess to say fast forward then through lots of years of art making and relationship, babies, etc., I ended up walking into what's called the Fire Lotus Temple, the Zen Center of New York City in Brooklyn, for their Sunday program, and hearing the Heart Sutra being chanted. Getting a book, I was supposed to chant it, but I was very shy, and I. But being in this room and having a room full of people chanting the Heart Sutra, which is a foundational text in Mahayana Buddhism, and having the same experience of, oh, this is what I was looking for. This was what the pamphlet didn't do. And so that really set me on like a serious path of, it was not casual. It is not casual for me. Yeah.
No, that is really the case. Like you are doing multiple week-long retreats um, a year. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the Zen Center where you're in full retreat and no contact with the outside world. And
Silence. Yeah.
hmm.
I'm here right
So,
now.
and you're oh,
By
you're
the
here.
way,
You're at the retreat right now. That's right.
I'm
That's
at
right.
Zen Mountain Monastery, yeah, in upstate New York right now, in
Hmm.
residence till the end of May, following the monastic schedule.
So this, I think that this really touches on something very important about the practice of yoga, which is that it's not simply ideas. It's not simply some ways of thinking about, well, this is what I am, this is what the world is, and here's how I'm related to the world and how I suffer, and but it's very importantly about what I do. And the doing changes you. The doing has some kind of impact on your system, and then your system functions differently, and then you perceive and experience the world differently, and you act differently, and in fact the whole world changes because of these doing slash experiences that you have. And knowing you, that is at the core of what draws you to this practice of yoga and meditation, etc. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's probably worthwhile to say that, for whatever reason that I have no explanation for, I went to India when I was 19. I can't even tell you why. I went, I knew I was going to go to those caves. That happened. But also like yoga, I don't want to sidestep the yoga piece because it is exactly that. Like, yes, it's important to sit and for me, it's very important to do these retreats that are week long in silence, intensive, that are based on seated meditation. And what I love about yoga is that it is so embodied. It's moving, breathing, chanting, and working with your mind. And for me, I I don't really want to separate the practices out. Like for me, it's all of one. But the
Mm-hmm.
doing piece that yoga offers is so important.
Well, how did you find yoga? I mean, what was the entry into yoga specifically?
Well, I think about so many of these things, like my answer is like, well, I just happened to like blah blah blah, blah. Like sort of blundering around through my life. But really, I had a friend who taught yoga, and I had my second child who decided that they would not sleep, born not sleeping. So I really spent the first 2 years of their life not sleeping for more than an hour or two at a time, and I was losing my mind. And so as a way of getting out of the house, I'm like, I'm going to my friend's yoga class, even though I've never done yoga. I don't know what it is. La la la. Anyway, go there just to get away from my children, basically. And yeah, what can I say? I loved it. I loved it. And it was, I don't even know what she called her style of yoga. Who cares? But it turned out it just was like a natural fit. And and I just kept going. And then I ended up being like, oh, I think because I'm kind of enthusiastic, I guess. I want to teach other people about how great this yoga thing is. So I want to do a teacher training, and just so happened through the most random choice of I don't want to change trains to get to it because I lived in New York City at the time, and I knew I'd have to, like, it was on the weekends, and I wanted to make it as easy as possible. So I found this training led by Gutta Hedwig, who is a Vini yoga teacher, that I picked completely based on the subway line. So
Yeah,
there you have it. Yeah.
her studio is the Yoga Center of New York.
Yoga School of New York. Yeah, they're New York
Yoga
Yoga
School
School.
of New
Yeah.
York, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And it just, I mean, who knows why these things happen, but through that first 200 hour, I ended up doing 600 hours with Gutta.
Yeah, she
That's
gives
how I,
serious trainings. She gives serious trainings. They go they go in steps, but if you're interested and you want to go deep, you can really spend a lot of time and really go quite deep with her.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I thank my lucky stars that her training was offered on the 7 line.
Right.
Yeah, so through her at that time, her 200 hour included a little introduction to Ashtanga Vinyasa, Vini Yoga, and Iyengar, which because it was the studio she was working at the time. She hadn't
Mhm.
started her own at that point. And so that's where I was introduced to Ashtanga and everything else. And yeah, yeah. And that's how I eventually I kept going with Gutta, and that's how I met you.
That's right. Yeah, because I used to go to New York to teach, and whenever I was there, she would always have me come in and do some things with her school. But in fact, I
Yeah.
still do some things online with her school. But
Yeah, you came in to do I think it was an overview of yoga philosophy, and that's when I think about because it was New York City, and maybe because it was Gutta, she had these amazing contacts, and we were exposed to some of the most amazing people, yourself included. Dolphy Wurtenbaker, Mr. Ramaswamy came in and led 2 weekends on the Yoga Sutra and the Vinyasa Krama. Edwin Bryant came in, did Yoga Sutra. So I had heard about Yoga Sutra stuff, but I have to say, both of those people that I just mentioned, they teach it at this very high level, which is one way of presenting it for sure. And then you came in making jokes and talking about the sport of curling and quoting from Philip Larkin. And I was like, okay, I'm interested. I'm interested. Now you have my
yeah,
attention.
I just really agree that there are different ways of understanding the Yoga Sutra. And um, I think one of the difficulties for academic approach to Yoga Sutra is that it is mostly focused on the very, very end stage of the liberation process. And that does not apply to 98% of the practitioners at the beginning. It on, and so people listen to that and they think, well, how do I apply this in my life? And one of the just amazing strengths of Mr. Deshikachar with his teaching was that he was able to translate those concepts into very down to earth, understandable, and immediately applicable to my life examples. And it was just, listening to him was just such a pleasure because he spoke so simply, and yet it felt like he was talking specifically to you. It was like, I know for a fact that after his lecture, people were walking out of that room going like, wow, that was really for me. and 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 everybody in the room was doing that. And I think it's a real mark of Vini Yoga that these important philosophical ideas are translated into a way that is easily digestible and applicable in our life.
Well, it almost, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, oh, it's also like, for me, it's the difference between having that experience in the cave and the pamphlet. It goes from, it, it can just be an abstract idea, an intellectual exercise, or it can be, yeah, a full embodied experience. And I think, you know, from the way you share what you learned from Mr. Desikachar, that opportunity is now there to share with others, and for me, that's what it was. It was like, oh, again, like I felt very met in the way that you were presenting it.
You're commenting on this, quoting from Philip Larkin's poem, This Be the Verse. And one of the things that you and I have shared over the years is a love for poetry and the way that these truths, which are so profound as to defy language often, can be captured in really beautiful metaphor or really beautiful description of experience. And it comes back to, your practice as an artist or your role as a creative. And how do you see creativity and the arising of the creative process in somebody? How does that relate to yoga?
I feel like I almost feel like they're interchangeable, really. That's been my observation. Um, in the sense that we I truly wholeheartedly believe that we are all born inherently creative. And if somebody is walking around now as an adult saying, well, I'm not creative, that is something that they were taught, usually at a young age, and usually with a dose of shame on top of it, which meant that
Just
they
for good
believed
measure.
it. Yeah, just so that you really never forget. But I think you can unlearn that. I believe that. And because it's pointing to something essential about our experience as a human being. And yeah, unless somebody has squashed it out of you, we are creative by
Well,
nature. And
what is creativity?
hmm. uh, well, I think one, it is experiential. And Yoga Sutra 2.1, so the first sutra of the second chapter, which in some you could say is explaining the whole chapter in very simple terms, simple but profound. Um, so it's tapas, this effort, intentional effort, svadhyaya, self-study, and Ishvara Pranidhana. That has many ways to talk about, but let's say um, not being concerned with outcomes. Or you could say maybe not not seeing anything as a mistake. I don't know how you feel about that
I
definition, but
love that definition of Ishvara Pranidhana. Yeah, not seeing
so
anything as a mistake. It's so good.
to me, that also sums up what is creativity. You make some effort to do something. In the process, you learn something about yourself, and you don't see any of it as a mistake. And we can all do that.
So, how do you describe the creative process, or how do you? I know you teach actually a lot of classes around art and creativity, and that you combine them with yoga. In fact, you're going to be doing that on the Yoga Wall platform. So, what I mean, how do those things interact, or how do they connect? What is yoga versus what is creativity, and how do they match?
I mean, part of it was making this connection between that sutra and sort of seeing my creative process in that sutra, and just kind of uh well, basically getting a little bit blown away by that they're the same. and and I also I do a YouTube series where I talk to artists about their creative process, and these are people who don't know anything about yoga per se. And when they talk about it, they're talking about, from our perspective, they're talking about yoga. And they don't use the same words, but it's the same. So it really just got me very curious if I could even more specifically dig into some of the main concepts that the Yoga Sutra presents and connect them with an experience of creativity, of the creative process. So in the class series that just ended, we started working with the vrittis, the pancha vrittis, the five mental activities that the Yoga Sutra outlines. So each class we focused on one of them and did like very simple. Like again, it's not, you don't have to be an artist or anything. Just be a person. You can do this. And and just what happened was so amazing, and I could never have predicted um, what people did. And I have to say, the svadhyaya that happened for the students and for myself, um, it really, I feel like, yes, we can move and breathe and chant and visualize and meditate, and we can write poetry and make marks on a page and sing and dance. And you know I really think it's, for me, it's like opening the realm of potential. And I think a lot about something that both you and Dolphy said in the yoga therapy training that I was part of, about how Mr. Desikachar would say, you can give someone anything as a practice, but you have to know why. And that appealed to me as someone who likes to not be bound by a lot of rules. So that's maybe the annoying side of being creative. But um, yeah, and I really like thought, okay, but you have to know why. That's not to be forgotten. And for me, this, was an invitation to open up what the potential is.
Yeah, I think that you're hitting on something super important here, which is that yoga is a experiential science, and it's a science of the way that experiences change our how our system is functioning. and then how that changes our experience of the world. And that, um, it can incorporate anything. I mean, it obviously incorporates physical movements and particular postures of the body, breathing, attention games. But it also incorporates things like pilgrimage, ritual. One of my favorite examples of Mr. Deshikachar's practices was that he simply gave a camera to a student and asked the student to take photographs of symmetry in the world. Like, please bring me photographs of things that strike you as balanced, as having symmetry. And that was an incredibly life changing practice for that man, because it changed what he was looking for in the world. So instead of looking for all the ways that he is going to end up on the short end of the stick and all the ways that things are not going to work out, et cetera, et cetera, he started looking for ways that were symmetric. And you start off by seeing like a gate, or you start off by seeing like the position of windows on a building. That evolved over time, and he actually gave a couple of photography exhibitions, after a few years. Um,
I
and
love that.
the photographs were of things that were, the symmetry was quite subtle. Like it was
Mm,
a field with a tree in the field. And so, and the photograph, the tree was on sort of one side of the photograph. So you have something that's filled and something that's empty,
mm,
and there's symmetry there. And it's not like we can just say any experience is yoga. There is actually a goal that we're headed towards, right? Where these, I would say there are goals, plural, right? So the first one is to bring the system into its optimal operating state. So that could be described as a balance, or that could be described as one where we have, on an emotional level, peace, where we have, on a mental level, sustained attention, on a breath level, we have long, smooth breathing, and on a physical level, that it's comfortable and stable, something like this. So we're trying to give people experiences that develop that on an initial stage. And that can be so many different things. For it's completely dependent on, is the what is the direction that the person is out of balance, out of peace, out of sustained attention now? Is it that the person is overly active, or it's that they have not enough strength to be attentive? These kinds of things, right? So it is that you can give anything, and it's within
and
this particularly well constructed uh, structure where we're helping to bring the person into balance. Of course, after
yeah,
that, there are future
yeah.
goals. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Just to clarify one thing, in the class we do a practice so that anything that happens is held within a kind of physical, mental, energetic container of the practice to be, so just to clarify that. And you making me think about like uh yoga is called a darshana, a perspective on liberation from suffering, and what you're just describing is all intended to create a shift in our perspective, right? From uh, lack of clarity towards clarity, you could say. And
Yeah.
I feel like creativity is also doing that, working in a creative realm. When you think of the best art that you've ever experienced in any genre, it changes you. It shifts your perspective on the world. And and you could say, how did you experience it? What state were you in? And yeah, I feel like there's so many parallels. And
Well, this is another thing that I want to talk about, which is the ultimate goal here is to bring our experience of the world to a place which is less and less affected by our personal experience, which we would call our samskaras, by our ancestral experience, which we may call vasanas, or which we might call our DNA, or whatever you want to say, and even from the influences that are foundational and common to every living being, which we might say are klesha, right? So, what we're doing is we're trying to come deeper and deeper and deeper into presence. And as we come more and more well into presence or awareness or whatever you want to say, it's not content less.
mm,
It's that the content has less and less warp or strain or stain or coloring from these influences that I just mentioned. And as that happens, there's some kind of we move from the patterns that I have developed in my previous experience driving how I perceive and what I see and how I act to more and more some kind of authentic expression arising within us that may utilize our patterns, but which is not originating in our patterns or which is not um, beholden to our patterns. And for me, this is how I would describe like the peak of artistic expression is that like it utilizes the skill of the artist which is a pattern which is developed over years and decades but which is not beholden to those patterns, right?
yeah.
And so then when we think of yoga as a process, what are we thinking about is we're thinking about how do we become more and more authentic? How do we become aware of and then identify and then uh, switch out of the cages that are just natural to being a being on the planet and allow this really special, really magical thing which is at the core of being. How do we let that be the origin of action, or how do we let that drive our being and our doing? And
Yeah.
you can describe it in all these philosophical ways, but at a lot of times art is the best way to describe that.
Yeah, it is.
It's like I don't know what, but that's it. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know what to say it, but that's it. That kind of thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I would say trust. I don't know how to describe it and go that way. Yeah. I really like I've been really feeling this lately of like, in the Vini yoga way of doing practice, one big thing is linking breath to movement, and not just linking breath to movement, but breath initiates movement. And for me, that is such, it's like a haiku moment of letting some, like such a simple thing, lift your arm, on an inhale, lower it down on an exhale. And if you start the breath first and then that begins that lifting up of your arm, who's leading? Who's driving? Ooh, now you start an exhale and the arm comes down. It's almost impossible to even say it's my arm now, I feel like there's something so amazing and simple in that, but so profound if you allow it to be that. And when I think about like how many gazillions of practices have I ever done, lifting my arms with an inhale and lowering them down with an exhale, but using the breath to initiate it, following so that the movement is following this breath. And I think about now with art making, yeah, it's just, I feel like that practice, move with my breath, has like totally changed I start, how I approach my work as an artist, and my capacity to receive what I need to make my work. I don't even think of it as my work anymore, actually, because it's like, I don't know, I'm just here. It's, you know,
I think this is a apt description of liberation. Now, I want to be careful because somebody may hear that and be like, "What? What are you saying?" But you know, things exist on continuum, and the seed of an idea sprouts, and then it grows into a sapling, and then it becomes a tree, and then later, after many years, it becomes a really fully developed tree, etc. Right? So, what is liberation? Well, in some important way, liberation is the freeing of perception from the history of the material container, right? So that, well, there are different theories on it, but that happens slowly over time. And as we go down this path, as we practice uh, mini yoga, meditation, etc., slowly we identify the ways that our histories, our past experiences are hijacking our current experience. And the better we get at identifying that and of repairing that, the more that it becomes possible to perceive and act without those histories negatively impacting what we're doing, or even positively impacting, just impacting what we're doing, right?
mm,
And
mm,
the focus of yoga becomes a kind of, well, let me be here. And as long as I'm here, I can't avoid action. Very Bhagavad Gita. I have to do something. And as long as I am doing, let me not be the origin of what I'm doing. So this process of, creativity that you're talking about, where you don't even consider the art actually to be your art, but something that arose through you, I think is a beautiful explanation of the yoga process of movement towards freedom, towards liberation. It's where we are more and more a conduit, and something is moving through us and utilizing our patterns and our previous histories, et cetera, but is not beholden to or captured by them. So then living is an artistic action, or your actions are art, or your communication is creativity, or however you want to
Yeah.
say it, is something along those
Oh,
lines.
yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about, just to be honest, like I went to art school in New York City and lived in New York City a long, long time, engaged with the art world, which is none of the things that you just described, to be clear. It's very competitive, and what it values is random. Uh, and uh, and I was completely in it, you know. I had a moment where I realized, oh, it wasn't enough to be like, yeah, I want to make art. I'm going to be an artist. For decades, I was like, I want to be a famous artist. I want to be a famous artist. And and how penned in that made me, you know? And so it's been a long, slow process of letting go of that one word, famous, and but staying connected to the art part, and then realizing that, and again, it's like the depth of subtlety that is, that the grip of that thing and the capacity to let it go, both, uh, is sort of equal to the power of what can be expressed, so, and trusting that, to let go of this dream of I'm going to be a famous artist is very scary. 20 years in, it's very scary. 30 years in. So, but then, loosening that grip and seeing like, oh, the goods are actually over here. I was, but
Yeah, it's just
it's
like
a
in life.
long,
It's
slow
so much like that. Yeah.
process. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be art. It can just, yeah, yeah. But like that trust piece of, it can seem so scary that this thing that we invest in, I invested in, uh, like what, what is left if I don't keep holding on to that particular
Right.
prison bar?
Right. If I let myself out of that cage, where am I? Who am I? What will I do? You know,
Big.
you're reminding me of this passage in it's a translation of Matsuo Basho's Oko no Hosomichi, which is translated by Sam Hamill as Narrow Road to the Interior. And he has this section in there where the Oko no Hosomichi is a travel journal by Matsubasho, who was a very who was who trained for more than 10 years as a Zen monk, and then came out of retreat and really to pursue his poetry, and he became sort of a foundation of the haiku movement in Japan. And as I know you know all this, I'm just filling in the background. So anyway, he has this beautiful travel journal where he walked from uh, Tokyo up north across the island and then south to a monastery, and he gave along the way a description, and every day, and each of the descriptions is a kind of cover for what it's like in a stage of the spiritual path.
Hmm.
So here he is, like, just describing a beautiful, like, like a scene with the horse and somebody, etc. But like, if you're a practitioner, it's clear like what's being said and the difficulty of what it's like as a practitioner that he's discussing, etc. So I just thought I wanted to
Mm.
read one of these passages, which is he's taken a side journey to go see a waterfall, and a description of it says 100 yards uphill, the waterfall plunged 100 feet from its cavern in the ridge, falling into a basin made by 1,000 stones. Crouched in the cavern behind the falls, looking out, I understood why it's called Urami no Taki, view from behind falls. And then he has a little haiku. He says, stopped a while inside a waterfall.
Mm.
Summer begins. Right? So, I mean, here's on the face of it this description of a waterfall, but it's a very particular one. It's like a waterfall that's coming out of a cavern in a ridge. Like, in other words, it's falling from like a cliff, and there's a cavern there. And he's crouched inside the cavern, watching the waterfall go down to the basin of 1,000 stones. So that's like our mind. Where do thoughts arise? Well, you can follow them back, but at some point you can't go any further. It's like there's a wall there. There's a ridge. Thoughts come out, and where do they go? They go to their basin of 1,000 stones, which is what? Which is whatever thoughts are. I mean, whichever objects are, wherever they're going. And what happened? Crouched in the cavern behind the falls, I understood why it's called view from behind falls. He's like having a spiritual awakening, and he's recognizing like, oh, this is what it's like when you have a little bit of internal distance from your mind and you're watching thoughts instead of being thoughts. And what happens? Stopped a while inside a waterfall. That, I mean, what a beautiful description. And what
Yeah.
happens? Summer begins. Ah,
Mm.
you know, like
Yeah.
like there's so much there that like, and it's so beautiful. It's so pretty. And
Yeah.
this to me is like what, like uh why poetry is so worth our time and our effort, and got to read some every day.
Yeah, it's so potent, so potent. Mm. Yeah, I mean, that is so beautiful. I had never heard that, so thank you for sharing that one. It's so beautiful. And it makes me think about in that class that we did recently on Vikalpa, which is one of the vrittis, so gets translated frequently as imagination. I know you often mainly include language in that
Mm-hmm.
for good reasons. And but anyway, for the practice piece of that class, I led a guided meditation, which I almost never really do, but I did. But I use very simple words, non-descriptive in the sense of like I just kept it super simple. And afterwards, when people shared about their experience, they had filled it all in. So if I said you're walking up a trail, everyone had immediately a particular trail. Oh, now the sun is coming out. I mean, that was what I was saying. And then people just reported like, oh, it was, they had a whole story. And I feel like what you just described is like the power of like a single word. And I think in Vini Yoga, we really depend on this actually when we're creating practices and in our own personal practice, that, say like you're sitting next to a stream. Okay. Well, for me, it happens to be this very particular one that I have very specific connection to, and it makes me feel XYZ every time I go and sit there, and you didn't say that. You just said you sit next to a stream.
The process of cleansing perception is tricky. We need the mind because that's what we perceive through. And the mind is an instrument that is required for perceiving. And yet, it has all these capabilities which are very useful in life, but which can also take over and drive.
Right.
And so much of what we're doing is helping in practice is discovering, well, what is it that is taking over? Those things are very often foundational to our identities to the point that we don't even see it until it's like, oh, wow, I've been trying to get this right for my dad for the last 50 years. And this perfectionist tendencies are causing me so much suffering, etc. And my dad is not even here now. What am I doing? Right? It's, it's, that is an integral part of like cleansing our perception. And it's so necessary to allow the mind to have its say in things in some portions of practice so that we can identify it and see it and come to the realization of like, oh, this is the way things are coloring.
Well, you have to get into the cavern behind the waterfall, yeah, to see
We
it. If
do.
you're in the waterfall, you're being
Yeah.
swept away. You don't, you maybe don't even realize you're in a waterfall.
Yeah.
But if it's that step back, it doesn't stop the waterfall. I mean, that's like very clear. He
That's
didn't
right.
stop the waterfall.
No, he
He's
stopped
watching it.
inside the waterfall.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you bring any poems today?
I did.
You want to read one, please?
Yeah. Um, well, I read two?
Yeah,
One's
please.
very so one of my all-time favorites is by Ryokan, another Japanese master. Uh it's very short. This is a translation. And it goes, even though all along I knew the world was impermanent, still my sleeves are never dry. I
Such
can say
a
it again.
Oh, so I was just gonna say
Yeah. Yeah.
such a concise uh such a concise and beautiful way of describing the practice. Yes, I recognize materiality is just a set. It's impermanent.
Yeah. And
And
my
yet,
sleeves are never dry.
and yet, I'm here.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking. So heartbreaking.
There is suffering.
And
Yeah,
yeah, it's heartbreakingly beautiful too.
that is true. That is true. Yeah, that's so nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually the other one, I'm not going to read this be the verse. I'm going to let you do that if you want. This one is one that I by a poet who's still alive, also named Chase Twitchell. Chase is a woman. Was a wonderful poet and a Zen practitioner also. And this I somehow didn't copy the title, so I'm not even sure the title. Sorry, Chase. Uh, Twitchell. So it says, what etiquette holds us back from more intimate speech, especially now at the end of the world? Can't we begin a conversation here in the vestibule and then gradually move it inside? What holds us back from saying things outright? We've killed the earth, yet we speak of other things. Our words should cauterize all wounds to the truth. I love that one because I think for me, it speaks to, well, the urgency of our moment. And, in thinking about tapaha, svadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana, and that nothing is a mistake in particular, I feel like we, myself included, play it so safe. And why? We're in, we're in a crisis. It's not a time for being safe.
Yeah, it's such a nice way of describing. I know that I need to be authentic. And yet, all these ways that I have been hold me back. May I be that. May I be authentic. This way that this poem that you just read remind me of the Portia Nelson autobiography in 5 short chapters. I walk down the street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk, I fall in, I am lost, I am helpless. It is not my fault. It takes me forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place, but it is not my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. It's so good. It's so good.
It's
It's like
good.
it's the yoga process, right? Okay, yeah, we all suffer. We're all embodied. We all have these
Yeah.
experiences. Our developmental process gave us all kinds of capabilities and wounds. And those capabilities and wounds dictate what is happening in our current life unless we take some measure to escape from them, which is, I think, why I was quoting "This Be the Verse" by Philip Larkin. Maybe I'll do that in a minute. But and it's not just that these things are capturing our present, but that actually unlocking and getting out of the cage takes, it's a process. It's not
Yeah.
like Shazam, I am enlightened. Woo! No more problems anymore. No, no, no. It's like actually we have to actually do the work. Now, where am I? It's dark and it's wet and it stinks and I don't like it down here. And how did I get here? And okay, and we have to actually do all this work. That's such a beautiful poem. I mean, it doesn't have the next 5 chapters, but I think the next 5 chapters are, I walk down another street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall into that hole.
Absolutely.
It's not like you just walk down another street and there's no more holes. Which brings me back to this be the verse, and there is a crass word in here which I'm going to change. So this is Philip Larkin, and he says they mess you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were messed up in their turn by fools in old style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have kids yourself. So that's a description of like how we get to the deep hole that we fall into, right?
Well, I
And
just want to say that when you read that poem in our training, you used the F-bomb and it made a great positive impact in my life. So don't play it
uh,
safe, Jake.
don't play it safe. Damn, damn. Oh, I failed. Oh, my patterning took over. Yeah, well, I mean, just this parallel between being authentic and the creative process, and this it bleeds also into meditation, where insight is not actually of our own generation; it just arises and is there, etc. And how all those things are interconnected, and that it just shows art is a fantastic vehicle for practice and for the refining of this yoga process or this meditation process, or you can then turn it around, just like you have been saying this whole time about it, and then you can use the yoga and the meditation as a way of supporting and cleaning the artistic process. It's just amazing how that fits together, and it's it's such a gift to be so deeply involved in all of these processes.
I know. Yeah. What a how lucky we are. How lucky we are.
So thank you very much for joining me today, Robyn. Super fun to talk with you and to be reminded of some of these really beautiful descriptions of life and practice. And thanks for being who you are. We'll see you again soon.
Well, thank you again. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
You can find Robyn at attayoga.ca, ATHA yoga.ca. And Robyn also is teaching an ongoing class on the yogawall.com platform. Check out some of her teaching. Thanks again, Robyn.
Thank you.